Alright, hello. It's been a while, hasn't it? Anyways, today I'm going to check out the new update of Hearts of Iron 4: The New Order. Or however new it is. I don't know, I've had a bit of a break. We're gonna be checking out Britain. Because I heard they revamped it.
Germany calling.
Well, that's new.
Germany calling. It seems that the famous British resolve is but a distant memory. The inevitable collapse of your defenses.
Man kapituliert er nicht so ohne weiteres. Kapitulation ist eine Frage der
What the fuck was that?
Und begrüßen werden dann das gemeinsam geschaffene, wiedererkannte, wiedererfahrene,
Hopefully my computer can handle it. Do I smell burning? I think we got it. Wow, that's a lot of information. Now, in case you don't know, there's a lot of reading in this mod, so you'll have my voice to accompany you throughout this journey. Now, the end of the dream. On September 3rd, 1939, the United Kingdom and the French Republic declared war on the Third German Reich after their unlawful invasion of Poland. The Germans invaded through the Low Countries to bypass France's defenses. After the failed evacuation of Dunkirk, Britain faced more losses in Greece, Gibraltar, and Egypt. Even the United States' entry into the war didn't change much in favor of the Allies, as Japan conquered its way across southeastern Asia, with the British Raj on the brink of full-scale revolt against British rule. Good. However, things began to lighten up as a joint Anglo-American invasion of Morocco was met with great success. As a result, the Allies refocused their efforts on North Africa. Thus was launched Operation Market Garden in late 1944, a military operation that was a decisive victory for the Allies. While this victory was something the Allies desperately needed, it didn't last long, when hell came knocking. In March of 1945, the Isles were invaded by the Greater Germanic Reich. Quite the name change. With most forces concentrated in North Africa, the Germans easily goose-stepped their way through until they conquered all of Britain. They were stopped short of Northern Ireland, which was defended by a united force of soldiers of different nationalities. Brits, Americans, Brazilians, Uruguayans, and many more took part in Northern Ireland's defense, with some wartime journalists dubbing it Grand Defense of Free Nations. Try as they might, the Allies had no more foothold against the Nazis in Europe, and subsequently the war effort collapsed. Market Garden's successes were overturned almost immediately, as the Germans and Italians took full advantage in their consolidated numbers. The last hope for the Allied effort in the war was gone. Now, the only remnants of the disorganized Commonwealth in the United States... Now, only the remnants of the disorganized Commonwealth in the United States were left standing. Sorry about that. Birth of the New Order. As the Treaty of London was signed, Hitler decided that Britain would be allowed to maintain the status of a free nation, quote-unquote, under Germany's guidance. The Prime Minister chosen by the Germans to lead in the immediate period after the war was none other than former Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who died less than a year into his ministry. I don't know who that is. Quickly being succeeded by Hastings Russell, the Duke of Bedford, who I also don't know, who established nominal political independence for the British People's Party, a newly formed organization reorganized by the Duke following the political downfall of former leader John Becket for his nominal Jewish ancestry. For the large minority of Jews in Britain, over 300,000 were taken from their homes and deported to the Reich, having not been heard from then or since. The chains of Britain's new order were being forged, but not much turned out to be needed to break them. The '56 Uprising. It was under this uneasy peace that following the retirement of the Duke of Bedford in 1953 and the ascension of the hardline fascist A.K. Chesterton to number 10, the real cracks in the British system began to show. Sorry about that. It was during the chaos of the West Russian War that the resistance found their time to strike. Jesus. Led by former head of the British SAS David Stirling, who had re-entered into the country covertly. Christ. The clock was ticking. No, that doesn't make any sense. Re-entered into the country? No, you re-enter the country. You don't re-enter into. Proofread this shit. The speed at which Germany was beginning to recover prompted Stirling to act quickly in attempts to break the government. And so, in late 1956, he called for a general uprising against the Chesterton government. Following several bloody engagements in the cities in which hundreds died amidst the brutal fighting, Stirling's attempt was foiled. Along with the communist guerrilla Bill Alexander, both were captured and brought before trials, which each lasted less than 15 minutes before their summary execution. Jesus Christ. The Domvile Ministry? Is that how you say it? I don't really care. Following the bloodbath of 56, Prime Minister Chesterton found his supporters flocking to his fiercest critic, Andrew Fontaine. Forced to resign, Chesterton and Lord Bedford nonetheless managed to secure number 10 for their mutual friend and confidant, Admiral Barry Domvile, a longtime member of the fascist Old Guard. Under the Domvile ministry, Britain's internal situation is stabilized, leaving open the opportunity for the economy to flourish. Under the overseeing hand of the German corporations, Britain has entered the 60s into a stride, with growth not seen since before the pre-war years. However, under the thin veneer of what is Britain lies a dark reality. Resistance activities are climbing incrementally once more, and the British People's Party has splintered into three fiercely opposed camps: the democratic pragmatists, the revolutionary ideologues, and the conservative old guards. Now under the veneer of civilization. That's this category right here. The last of Old England. Richard Austin Rab Butler is the odd man out in the Domvile cabinet, for the simple reason that he is the only one with intentions not aligned with his peers. Whereas Domvile, Fontaine, and the rest praised the coming of a new Britain from the ashes of decadency. Hang on. Sorry, I had to cough. Butler sees his mission to treat Britain's wounds and restore her to tranquility. Amongst his faction of the BPP, termed the Pragmatists, lies a host of junior politicians who each have different interpretations of what Butler's idea of democracy entail. One such is the up-and-coming minister Reginald Maudling, a supporter of Butler who's willing to get his hands dirty with the Germans to get an edge over his enemies. Another eminence in Butler's circle is the minister Harold Wilson, a long-serving civil servant and the original co-author of the Beveridge Report during the war. Wilson seeks to reform the BPP into a government committed to the welfare and health of the British people. I don't know how you could do that, but this moron wants to try, I guess. The flames of fascism. The war and the execution of Sir Oswald Mosley did little to stunt the movement of fascism in Britain, as the German overlords sunk their tentacles into the Isles. Unlike his rivals in the Old Guard, Andrew Fontaine views fascism as a fire that rises from below, one that shall scorch away the old to leave behind a purified future, an idea as exciting to his supporters as it is horrifying to his opponents. Fontaine and his men head the faction of the BPP known as the Ideologues, who seek a vastly more revolutionary fascist state that Chesterton and Domvile have led into the current day. Fontaine presents to his allies and his enemies an overpowering aura of strength and unity, but behind closed doors the Ideologues are just as divided as the rest. New coming ministers Jeffrey Ham and John Bean both have revolutionary ideas for how the organs of a fascist isle might function, and their conflict may threaten to douse the British flame once and for all. What exactly do they mean by revolutionary? Seriously, what the fuck do they mean? The Guardians of the Old. Ever since there have been pro-German and later collaborator groups in Britain, they have been led by the Old Guard. And the British People's Party is no different. Downing Street has been there since the Duke of Bedford's days, and so it remains with Prime Minister Domvile. The architects of British fascism, the Old Guards, believe in a top-down approach where fascism serves to defend and protect the old order. Whilst their numbers may be shrinking in the Commons, their hold on the House of Lords remains strong, where Domvile's most trusted allies are found. Both Lord Tavistock and A.K. Chesterton reside there still, along with their Old Guard ally Gerald Wallop, the Earl of Portsmouth, whom many consider Domvile's heir. However, Wallop himself stands out as the leader of the organicist movement, a small sect of rural revialists and absolutists. Time will tell if the Old Guard remain as they are, or turn to reviving the ancient. I just noticed there's no more Scotland. I remember there used to be a Scotland. Did they just delete Scotland? I don't know. The Resistance. A new organization has risen in opposition to the collaborators. Many British subjects refuse to be ruled by King Edward or Germania's puppet government. This has led to the establishment of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance, or HMMLR for short. Fun fact, apparently that's a legacy title, or whatever the term is. In the past, when Burgundy was still a factor in anything, the resistance was going to be influenced by HMMLR. So, hence the title, Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance. I don't know why the fuck it's still called that, but what the hell have they been doing with Burgundy anyways? Anyways, going. Maintaining contacts with the Organization of Free Nations in Canada, they conduct efforts to undermine the collaborationist government. HMMLR has two major factions running it, SOE and the UFLR. The SOE was a wartime organization with the purpose of conducting espionage, reconnaissance, and daring operations. Their mission now is to liberate Britain and restore the rightful monarch to the throne. The UFLR was formed after the chaos of the 36 Uprising. Their main goal is to liberate the working class from the boot of German corporations. It is led by a coalition of left-leaning organizations led by the war-scarred socialist Jack Jones. The Exiles. The retreat from Britain was an affair characterized by abject chaos. Those in Britain today speak of a list which divided those who would be able to leave and those who could stay. Among that list was most of the wartime cabinet of Winston Churchill, including future Prime Ministers Herbert Morrison and Harold Macmillan. Also on the list were many who had the fortune of being covered by the umbrella of Lord Beaverbrook. Such as the now leader of the opposition, Michael Foot. What are these fucking names? In Ottawa, the exiles have sat adrift for the past 17 years. And the malaise of perhaps never being able to once again set foot on their beloved homeland has permeated much of the government, whether it be for Queen and country or the voice of the people. The current party leaders, Macmillan and Foot, have risen to near mythological status within their respective ranks. The leadership of the exiles could not be under more safe hands or feet, provided that there still lies hope. Tally fucking ho. Alright. Now what do we have here? Ghosts of 1956. 6 years. 6 years since the uprising of 1956 wrought disaster and anarchy upon nearly every part of this nation, as the Chesterton ministry was paralyzed under its weight. Fortunately, chaos was met by the combined forces of order, and with a joint pushback from both our army and our German brothers' garrison, the uprising was crushed utterly. Since then, an uneasy calm has returned to the nation, and the Domvile Ministry's enlightened rule has caused prosperity to return to Britain, BPP membership to increase, and the extreme ideological splits between fascists and non-fascists in our party to become workable. However, all reports from MI5 indicate the same thing. Himmler activity is increasing again, and the terrorists are beginning to re-emerge in areas where they have not been active since the uprising. We must not make the mistake Chesterton did, and thus we must begin to take preemptive measures. The workshop of the world will not be available in your political menu, get event. Alright, now, full disclosure, I am going to be cheating. Despite having thousands of hours in this game, or 1,000 hours in this game, I am not very good at it, and I am only here for the story. Oh, difficulty settings. Welcome to Britain. Here you'll find extra settings to make your game on the British Isles either harder or easier. Well, this category will disappear after the first focus is taken. Thereafter, the changes laid out in the settings will take place. This enables more intense or more relaxed playthroughs. For a first playthrough, we recommend not altering the difficulty. Okay, then I won't. Let me just... there. Alright, sorry about that. You might have noticed a cut there. Hang on one second. There may be a few more of those in the video. Because this is going to be a longer one, and occasionally I need to just adjust some things. But anyways, where were we? I was just aimlessly scrolling around here, I think. Anyways, just ignore that, and... God, I forgot about the economy menu. I'm just going to ignore this, because I have no idea what any of this does or means, and I don't think anybody else does either. I don't even know why they added it, frankly. God, this is the most exhausting... This is the most exhausting stuff in the game. Managing all of this shit. I mean, to be fair, you gotta do this shit in the main game, but I think they should have just made, like, a visual novel or something. I don't know if this works for Hearts of Iron. You know? I mean, I don't know how that would have worked either, but this is clearly way more story-based than the average Hearts of Iron mod. Anyways, let's get this show on the road. And play. Is there even a use for this? Oh god, it's slow. Oh. Alrighty. The Domvile Cabinet. In the name of His Majesty King Edward the Eighth, I hereby appoint the following as members of Cabinet, and the government ran in his name. Home Secretary... Secretary? Really? Home Secretary Andrew Fontaine, Chancellor of the Exchequer? The fuck is that? Richard Austin Butler, Foreign Secretary Ronald Nall Kane, 2nd Baron Brockett, Defense Secretary Angus Maud, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster Walter Montagu Douglas, Walter Montagu Douglas Scott, 8th Duke of Buccleuch, and 10th Duke of Queensberry. Lord Chancellor Sir Jocelyn Morton Lucas, 4th Baronet. Minister of Education and Science Jane Birdwood, 2nd Baroness Birdwood. Minister of Health Ben Green. Minister of Labor Harold Wilson. Minister of Transport William Edward David Allen. Minister of Food and Agriculture Gerald Wallop, 9th Earl of Portsmouth. Minister of Culture Reginald Dorman Smith. President of the Board of Trade Reginald Maudling. Minister of the Commonwealth Reginald Manningham Buller. Scotland Secretary William Ware Gilmore. Postmaster General Frederick Bennett. Chief of the Defense Staff Gerald Templar. Chief of the Imperial General Staff Walter Walker. First Sea Lord and Chief of the Naval Staff Angus Graham, 7th Duke of Montrose. Chief of the Air Staff Benson Railton Freeman. Barry Domvile? Is it Barry or Gary? I think that says Barry. I can't read cursive. But let me just make sure. Barry, yep. Why is that demilitarized, by the way? There we go. A haunted Prime Minister. Heavy rain was hammering loud on the windows of Downing Street when the booming gongs of Big Ben rang out across London 12 times, signaling the end of another day, and that it was finally time for Prime Minister Barry Domvile to go to bed. Okay. Running his old, somewhat shaky hands over his face, Domvile let out a pained sigh as he looked down on the report before him. A report which had mockingly devoured the past 4 hours of his life and all but ensured he'd be getting no sleep at all tonight. This had to be the 3rd time he'd read it from start to finish, but the sheer trepidation and dread he had felt when first turning the pages never left, and only intensified. Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance. The name alone was enough to send a disgusted shiver down the Prime Minister's spine. He remembered when he first heard it, in this very room no less, as he was meeting his old friend and then Prime Minister, A.K. Chesterton, in 1954. He remembered how they had both laughed at the ridiculousness of it all, at the very notion that some wide-eyed idealists and bitter remnants of the past could possibly pose a threat to the resurgent Britain and her watchful German allies. He remembered how the reports continued in the years that followed, telling of secret meetings and covert raids, warning of a ticking time bomb ready to explode at any moment. Domvile remembered when it did explode, and the world came crashing down. Now, that very same report he had once laughed at sat in front of him again. Setting the report aside, Domvile reached for his telephone and dialed the German embassy. He would not make Chesterton's mistake and pay the price he did. Oh, no. Now was the time for action, to man the guns and prepare for battle. The Admiral had one last war to fight, and he intended to win. Britannia sails to war. Now what's next on the agenda, I wonder? Either approach the Hydra or fighting shadows. Let's approach the Hydra. Our party, the BPP, is by all reports not what it once was. Where once there was unity and strength, factionalism and corruption have taken hold. This is entirely intolerable in a time where we will have to pass new measures to deal with the terrorists. The Old Guard, devout supporters of Prime Minister Barry Domvile, still embody the spirit of Britain and can be fully relied on both for loyalty and competence. They unfortunately no longer hold a majority in the party. The pragmatists, weak advocates of demagogic rule, led by Rab Butler, will find a way to object to our measures on the grounds of tyranny, and the ideologues, ex-communists in a fascist cloak who stand for much the same mob rule that the pragmatists advocate for, will oppose these measures for no better reason than that the Old Guard supports them. We must find a remedy to this constant factionalism and create a totally united party, or else infighting will consume us before Himmler even get a chance to. Now let's see where this ends up. What is this? Holy Jesus. The end of the missile crisis. This shit pops up at the beginning of the game every time. The event that has kept the world sitting on the edge of its seat for several months has thankfully finally come to an end today, as the United States and Japan have reached agreement over the Hawaiian Missile Crisis. While the USN First Fleet and the IJN have been at standoff around Hawaii for months now, Vice President Kennedy and Prime Minister Ino have agreed that Japan will withdraw its ballistic missiles, discovered by a CIA U-2C spy plane, from the disputed islands, while the United States would remove its own MRBMs from Australia. This has been a massive diplomatic coup for Vice President Kennedy, who negotiated the deal, while world press has largely criticized Nixon for his lack of action in negotiations. You've staved off midnight for now. Now let me take a look at all this shit. Okay. Okay, dear God. Okay. What is this? Oh, I need a drink of water. Deutsche Bank. What the fuck is this? Hang on. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, dear viewers, but I have to take a minute to... I gotta take a minute to see this shit. What the fuck is this? What's the difference between private and corporate? By the R, I assume it means Reich. Like German-owned shit, and private means, like, British corporate-owned. Yeah, Reichswerk, Blumenwag, Voss, fuck, AEG, Anglia and London. Wait, how come those are private and not corporate? It's still fucking AEG, Deutsche Bank, and Reichswerk. What the fuck is this? Jesus Christ. Oh my God. What the fuck? I can't. Yeah, alright. Let's see this shit. Let's fucking keep going. Oh, dear God. If anybody can explain that in the comments, please do so. I need it. Oh, here we are. 1962 budget statement. Man, a rousing fucking read here, I bet. The theme of this year's budget is sound expansion. Expansion of the British economy's strengths without expansion of the British economy's flaws. In this spirit, it is the government's goal to achieve 3% real annual growth by the end of 1962. The clock ticked to 6. Brad Butler folded away his reports. Lit cigarette burned out on the ashtray. He has triple-checked the numbers every day for the past week and found them sound. Sensible, practical economic policies were neatly arranged in his head and on the budget he was about to hand to Parliament. He had no doubts he could not afford them. However, Wait, hang on. He couldn't afford them as in he couldn't afford the policies or the doubts? Because I read it as he couldn't afford the policies. Anyways, however, as we pursue a growing economy, we cannot allow inflation to destroy all our efforts. Therefore, it is also the government's goal to restrain inflation under 3%. The clock ticked to 7:30. Butler exited his car, thanked his driver, and lugged his heavy attaché case from Cromwell Green. Fuck. What is wrong with me? And lugged his heavy attaché case, I think that's how you say that, across Cromwell Green. He saw a gaggle of journalists around a podium, atop which was Andrew Fontaine. Butler stopped to watch the commotion. Fontaine spoke of prosperity, cooperation, greater rewards for the British worker. Fontaine spoke of promises that were not his to fulfill. Butler turned his head and walked away. Above all, it is the government's chief aim to provide prosperity and employment for all Britons. Therefore, it is also the government's goal to create 500,000 new jobs by the end of 1962. The clock ticked to 8:30. In the halls of Westminster, a few corridors away from the House of Commons, Butler reassures an increasingly nervous Domvile. Prime Minister, we've had our finest civil servants on the job. Yes, we checked the numbers. Yes, I checked the numbers. Butler felt the pressure which lay on top of Domvile. Pressure from above. Pressure that was Butler's to alleviate. Time has come to fulfill all our promises. To be honest, I don't understand people's obsession with creating new jobs. I mean, I don't know much to begin with, but... Well, I guess it could help, but... Yeah, I don't know. I don't know a lot. I'm just dumb on this, I think. Just ignore that. Forget I said anything. Anyways, night and day. Barry Domvile had long since grown used to the headache that seemed to appear in his head whenever Rab Butler and Andrew Fontaine were in the same room together. Sometimes it appeared as a heavy thump. Other times it would be a high-pitched whirring. Whatever it was, it seemed that his body had developed an instinctual intolerance for the senseless, endless bickering that filled the room whenever the two men were forced to interact. Prime Minister, you simply cannot abide by some of the measures here. It is obscene. A gross violation of the British people's privacy and personal safety, Butler said, forcing Domvile to zone back in. Of course he took issue with the Freedom Security Act. He would never turn down a chance to illustrate how much more decent and reasonable he is from everyone else. I mean, some of the methods are grotesque. Increased usage of the BFC, greater surveillance in public, a year's prison for curfew breakers, insanity. A humorless chuckle from across the room signaled that it was time for Fontaine to speak, as if Domvile hadn't heard enough pseudo-Bolshevik filth that day already. Oh, this act is insanity, all right. I'm not going to bother putting on a voice all the time. Oh, this act is insanity, all right. How can you call it a Freedom of Security Act when you barely increase the funding of the security agencies? And how are they meant to get anything done without authorizing use of extraordinary force to interrogate suspects? You're practically begging for another uprising. Oh, you would love another uprising, wouldn't you? Butler spat. Another chance to gratuitously brutalize your fellow countrymen is practically a gift to your lot. Why, are you impugning on my character, Butler? I do believe that would come under Section 7, Paragraph 6 of the Penal Code. Not a good look at all, is it, you gish-galloping, moralizing twit? Can both of you be quiet for 2 seconds so I can think, if you please? Pro tip, don't use caps lock for yelling. Just add the fucking punctuation points. Domvile snapped, slamming his desk for emphasis, like a fucking Ace Attorney character. Butler and Fontaine both stopped, looking at Domvile. Both stopped, looking at Domvile. Sorry, I read too fast. I will consider some revision to the bill, as you have both been so helpfully. As you have both so helpfully suggested, he said, feeling that all too familiar thumping in his head. In the meantime, I'm going to ask both of you to get out of my office so I can think this over, if you please. And like two naughty schoolboys, they bowed their heads and left. Fucking hell. Okay, what next? Not that one. Fighting shadows. It is all well and good to say that we're planning to fight Himmler, but in truth we do not really know who it is we are fighting. The only Himmler commanders we know the identities of are Left Resistance leader Jack Jones and SOE leader Fitzroy McLean. The lower-ranking commanders and the leader of Himmler itself remain unknown to MI5. We also have virtually no knowledge of how many terrorists there are, nor do we know what weapons they have access to, or how they plan to use them. Finding a borderline invisible foe will be extremely difficult, and we must get MI5 to ramp up their investigations into Himmler if we ever wish to truly defeat them. MI5 is one of our oldest, most loyal, and most effective houses that yet stand. And we get an event as a bonus, too. Yay! Should I start the intelligence agency? I don't know. I've only just got this DLC. I don't know what any of this shit does. Oh, here we are. The Reich's last conquest. On the 19th of January, 1962, Eberhard Kollner became the first man to ever land on the moon. While the space race has been a struggle between the Reich, Japan, and the USA, and while the Americans had managed to put the first man in space, the Führer was proud to announce that the German landing firmly plants the Reich as the victor in the competition. Grand ceremony is planned in Germania to present Kollner and his fellow astronauts with the Iron Cross, and a week of celebration has been declared across the Reich. While terse congratulations have been sent from America and Japan, President Nixon has vowed that the United States would be the first to create a permanent mission on the moon, and Japan shortly thereafter announced it would be the first to land on Mars. Has the space race been won? It appears so. Yeah. Evening chats. I'm gonna be quite honest, I think he's a load of bollocks. It's too convenient of a scapegoat for them to blame everything on. Hannah and her friends often met on hikes nights, not hikes. Am I blind? Hannah and her friends often met on nights like this. They would all wait until they finished their respective jobs before creeping out of their houses and meeting up for a smoke and a quick natter. Not used to that. More often than not, the discussions turned to the various political questions that dominated the nation. On this evening, discussion had turned to the identity of the ever-elusive man behind the resistance, the boss. The discussion tonight had started over a recent failed police raid of the docks, only minutes away from Hannah's house. This raid, according to Gloria's husband who worked at the docks, aimed to arrest a wing of the left resistance operating in the city. She had remembered the outraged shouting of the woman as they had arrived. Yet as the jackboots rolled in, the operation went horrifically wrong. Details were scarce, but supposedly 5 policemen were dead, and the left resistance members escaped without a single man dead or captured. And so, just as it had time and time again, the local government was left embarrassed, and people were left to wonder once again how the resistance, thought dead after 56, was still able to survive after 20 years of persecution. You know, things really do seem to be reaching a boiling point, Gloria said excitedly. I can't wait to see how things will end up. You know, we can't miss this like our fathers did. Hannah paused before replying. She knew Gloria's father had been a conservative before the war, as Gloria was now, and yet she was supporting men she would see as radicals in more peaceful times. She wondered silently, could this kind of unity hold out in peace as it has in the time of troubles? In this time of troubles, sometimes anonymity has its advantages. Oh, and another one. For need. Chancellor of the Exchequer was hardly an enviable position, even in times of prosperity. Yet Richard Austin Rab Butler was neither foolish nor unpopular, if he did say so himself. Settled with a state scarred by war, wherein corruption was commonplace, he had kept the economy steady and helped rebuild Britain from the destitution of the 1940s. Yet despite all of his achievements, every so often Butler couldn't help but look back with fondness to the 30s, where he worked for an independent, free Britain. He had been a young minister then, yet they were perhaps the only times in his career that he felt free, without regret. But then came Hitler, and it had all come crashing down. Butler didn't consider himself a coward, nor any of his contemporaries in the Foreign Office in the 30s. While men like Churchill baited for war, men like Chamberlain fought for peace. Butler hadn't fought in the Great War, but he had seen the effect it had had on the British people. Entire towns had been decimated, their male population wiped out in a single afternoon. For that reason, he had sided with Chamberlain and fought to keep the boys safe this time. But it was all for naught. War came, and the graves of England were filled once again. Chamberlain and the others were gone now too, either dead or having fled across the Atlantic, or than likely cursing him as a coward and a traitor nightly. He was alone, surrounded by sycophants, fascists, and fools, left to somehow rebuild a broken isle. More than once he'd considered getting on a ship and leaving this godforsaken isle, to leave the fascists to collapse under the weight of their own incompetence. But it was a fool's dream. He'd made his bed now, built upon the corpses of the innocent. All he could do now was to make this new Britain as free and prosperous as the Germans would allow. Sorry, that's my cat. Hush, hush. Nowadays, there seems no reason to cry. Now, what next? Let's define an enemy, I guess. What exactly is Himmler? It is a question that MI5 has been puzzling over for the past few years, and one that is seemingly no closer to being answered. While the official line from our government is that they are bloodthirsty Bolsheviks tied to the trade unions, and in many cases this appears to be true, that is clearly not the full story. Many Himmler fighters are clearly members of the old government, with ties to the exiles, fighting against our king for the pretender Elizabeth, which would suggest they are not at all communist in allegiance. Another far more worrying theory has gained traction in our government, although not in MI5, who fully disagrees with it. Many believe that Himmler is in fact a tool in the hands of high-ranking members of the government who seek to use it to increase their personal power, a dagger which they could plunge into our backs at any time. Now we get more command power and an event. And now we wait. Oh! Assassin strikes at Hitler. News from Germany is sporadic at best. Information smuggled out of Germania reports that shortly after celebrations over the moon landing settled, military units and several platoons worth of bodyguard units filled the streets and immediately put the city under martial law. Apparently, an assassin, which the Germans claim belonged to the Japanese Tokumusokan, attempted to kill the Führer, but were stopped in his attempt by one of Hitler's personal bodyguards. Already, reports of various other assassinations have surfaced. In the streets, the various military units nearly came to blows, as several units ordered each other to stand down and the chain of command fell apart. Suddenly, the Reich seems much weaker. Can the Germans maintain their New World Order when they can hardly handle themselves? A house divided, blah 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 blah. Now, that used to be an agent from Burgundy. I don't know if it still is, but it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't anymore, considering the devs seem to have made it their life's mission to relegate Burgundy to the history of the mod, like Gibraltar. Yeah, remember the fucking Gibraltar Dam? Remember when Italy was bigger? I remember. What happened to that? Anyways, let's continue on. For right. Of all the myriad social events and activities Gerard Wallop, 9th Earl of Portsmouth, frequently attended, the King's evening reception at Buckingham Palace was by far the most important and the most enjoyable. Surrounded by righteous men of the peerage, esteemed knights and dames, and of course His Majesty himself, it truly was perfection. Nothing like the weeping ruin that was Parliament these days, stuffed with money-hungry German stooges, thuggish louts, and lying socialists. It had fallen so very far from the initial days of glory when he had stood by Bedford's side as the BPP swept to power. Now only a handful remained true to the vision they set out with in 1945, and their number dwindled daily. Picking a glass of champagne from a roving waiter, Wallop deftly navigated through the packed ballroom, exchanging smiles and quick conversations with old friends whilst pretending not to notice his enemies. Especially the ever-arrogant Germans and infernal Wiesenmayer. Why the king even invited them in the first place was beyond him. Soon, one of Bedford's ministers, awarded a barony for his service, approached Lord Portsmouth. Wallop's initial enjoyment of their discourse started to sour, however, as it became quickly clear the ex-minister was approaching him not as an independent player in the game of British politics, but merely as the leading representative of the old guard. One excuse later, and Wallop was free of the man, sighing in relief. Whilst he was a firm supporter of Domvile's and agreed with the old guard in many places, he despised that his own ideas and ambitions were being crushed under the monolithic weight of British fascism. Quite how he could escape from under it, however, remained unanswered, to say nothing of reaching Downing Street in the first place. At that moment, however, His Majesty King Edward VIII entered the ballroom, and all gloomy thoughts of politics vanished in an instant. England is but the king's men, the king's land, and the king's coin. Fuck the monarchy. Anyways. Oh, here we are. 2 events, I believe. On Himmler. Harry Domvile sighed as he leant down into the chair at the head of the briefing room table. Opposite him, Maxwell Knight stood, silently staring down the table. With Domvile seated, the remainder of the cabinet sat down almost at once, their faces carefully blank as they all settled. Wiesenmayer stared down from the table from beside Domvile, his carefully composed face revealing nothing but a slight aura of distaste. And with that, Knight began. You need a comma after Domvile here. Gentlemen, he said, gentlemen, I can't do spy, he said, addressing the room, it is no secret to all of you that Her Majesty's most loyal resistance, as they are commonly known, Himmler, is the largest known internal threat to our government. You gotta fucking change that Himmler shit. It is laughable. Following the Prime Minister's orders for me to expand our understanding of them and their weaknesses, Knight nodded towards Domvile. I have handed this task to my most capable subordinate, fucking hell, Mr. Kim Philby, who will be briefing us all today. Mr. Philby? Philby stood to his feet. Thank you, sir. Now, I'll be honest, the Resistance run a tight ship. I've been unable to find much that we do not already know. Nonetheless, I shall lay out the facts we have established. They are a loose alliance between the left resistance, led by Jack Jones, and the Special Operations Executive under Fitzroy McLean. There are two things uniting these incredibly diverse groups. The first is a figure who we only know as the Boss. The second is their desire for a free Britain. That is all we know about them on a broader scale. We have more information on a local scale, but nationally, that's it. What do you mean more on the local scale? That was more Russian than Dutch, but hell, I don't even know what a Dutch accent sounds like. Wiesenmayer asked. Ow, stop, cat, stop. Stop it. Leaning forward in his chair, raising his eyebrow in interest. We are currently looking into some of their cells in Essex, but nothing is for certain at the moment, Philby replied. Wiesenmayer looked dissatisfied, shaking his head. Expect you to detain and execute these insurgents soon. And quickly, too. Yeah, you said that was soon, dumbass. My cat was scratching me. Sorry about that. Okay. Peter III, the Chief Mauser. Walk into 10 Downing Street, and you will hear the shuffling. Fucking hell! What is wrong with me? The shuffling of feet on carpet. The vigorous shuffling of papers. The rhythmic clacking of typewriter keys. Clocks in every room tick as civil servants focus their attention on their work. Radios are tuned primarily to the home service for the bureaucrats' edification, save for the one tuned to the third network in the break room, where tea is poured, biscuits are retrieved, and bureaucrats gather around for lunch. The garden is a popular place for quiet reflections in which private secretaries take a break or a long lunch, seated on the benches and admiring the delicate garden work. Special advisors meet in its drawing rooms to discuss the business of the day. Their conversations are sometimes sober and sometimes productive. But you will also see is a cat. Peter III, a black cat which skulked these halls, held an esteemed title, Chief Mauser to the Cabinet Office. Though a relatively recent tradition, the office of Chief Mauser has brought much joy to the bureaucrats and civil servants who work in this hallowed office. His formal responsibility is the protection of 10 Downing Street against rodents and other pests. Informally, however, it exists so that the harried and overworked staff of 10 Downing Street have a cuddly little creature to comfort them. Hang on. But it has been impossible to ignore how old Peter III has become. He has served dutifully in this post since 1947, when he was just a kitten, and in 1962 his efforts have noticeably slowed. He labors to jump up on desks that a younger Peter would have exerted little effort towards. He sleeps longer in the in trays of staff and must be pried off the morning copy of the Times. He eats less liver than his once prodigious appetite for liver might allow. Nevertheless, Peter III remains a solid companion for Downing Street civil servants. Till his last days, he shall bring comfort and joy into their lives. There is so little joy in 10 Downing Street, but Peter III does his best. Rest in peace. I swear to God, if they fucking write out how that cat dies, I will personally punch the lead dev in the nuts. I fucking swear. Cat better make it out alive. I fucking swear. Anyways, let's check in with Germania. While we do not always agree on everything with our German brothers, they did still liberate Britain, are the unquestioned saviors and masters of Europe. Over the years, the garrison has become just as active a part of the government as any other, and Plenipotentiary Wiesenmayer has been instrumental in our affairs. Fucking hell. For these reasons, we will functionally need German approval if we wish to push back against Hitler, especially since we will require the garrison to assist us with it. Therefore, we will meet with Wiesenmayer and Wolf both, and inform them of our new anti-partisan policies and request approval and assistance. It isn't as though they will have any real objections to fighting the terrorists, right? We get some corpo shit and some events and blah 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 blah. Alright. I don't know where I'm gonna end this. I think I'm gonna end this once we get down here. This will just be an introductory episode. I don't know when the next episode will come out, or if, but that delay, I was busy, There's a lot of stuff to do. I don't really know if anyone cares at this point, but anyways, for strength, whenever Andrew Fontaine stood to... why are we auto-saving? Oh, I paused it right on fucking... Anyways, while it's buffering, I'll just load it, or read it. Whenever Andrew Fontaine stood to speak in the House of Commons, everyone had something to say. Whether it was a roar of disdain or a cry of adoration, the man's presence was simply too encompassing to ignore. He knew and encouraged this, of course. He was an ideologue in the purest sense of the word, and such intense emotion was what he needed to succeed. Today, he was to deliver a speech condemning the resistance and to encourage the party to come together. As if. The old guard were practically irrelevant, and the pragmatists would do everything they could to weaken the nation from within. As he stood, his supporters cheered. Soaking in the adulation for a moment, Fontaine cleared his throat, as I should probably do as well. Sorry about that. Mr. Speaker, with the recent lull in resistance activity, it would perhaps be easy to rest upon our laurels, to allow the fire within ourselves to die down, so to speak. This cannot be allowed to happen. I would remind this House that our enemies are many, and they suffuse every aspect of our society. If we wish for the fascist revolution to survive and continue, then we must act. A series of jeers and hollers came from the pragmatists. Good. He continued. Now, while the enemy without what? While the enemy without is very nearly stamped out for good, I would advise all of those good and true members of this House to keep constant vigilance for the enemy within, for they are amongst the most insidious of our foes. More jeers from the pragmatists were drowned out by his own supporters. Of course, neither side knew that the resistance was nowhere near entirely scattered yet, but they didn't need to know. So long as they took his words to heart and didn't question them, he was satisfied. Britain was on the precipice of a new age, and Andrew Fontaine would be at the head of it. Is this a black shirt rally or a government building? Hitler names Bormann his successor. Really weird. For the past 15 games, it's always been Speer. Following the recent attempt on the German Führer's life by a suspected Tokumisokan, sorry, I'm still new to Japanese, agent, the pressure upon the Führer to name an official successor and for the Reichstag to formally recognize the choice has been steadily building. After almost a week of debate and speculation, Adolf Hitler today appeared on live television from the Reichstag and announced to the Reich that his successor would be Martin Bormann. Considered the most likely choice, the decision has been welcomed by the moderate and conservative elements of Germany, although the liberals and some elements of the military have expressed concern. With Bormann's commitment to staying the course of Nazism with only minor reform, Albert Speer, Hermann Göring, and Reinhard Heydrich have criticized the choice of being certain to drive the Reich into an early grave. More of the same, it'd seem. British fascism, what the fuck is that? The First World War scarred Britain like no conflict since the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. The blood-soaked trenches of France and Flanders etching themselves in the traumatized psyche of an entire generation. As Europe staggered forth into an uncertain new world, it found something truly monstrous. and Britain was no exception to this dark discovery. Unlike its brethren on the continent, fascism in Britain developed along two distinct lines. I need more water. The more orthodox revolutionary branch, championed by Oswald Mosley, and another far more idiosyncratic form of fascism that germinated among the minds of the aristocracy and upper class. This latter form preached a distinctly British fascism, one that would shield the Britain of old from the financiers. What? What the fuck are financiers? The Jews and the communists, always them, and save the empire from destruction at their hands. Fucking hell. When German boots marched through London and sent out the call for collaborators to lead the new Britain, it was the adherents of this British fascism who answered, and thus cemented their doctrine as dominant for a time. Now, however, British fascism finds itself once more at a crossroads. After a decade of unopposed rule, the uprising of 1956 ran open the divide once more as Mosley's acolytes returned to prominence, along with believers in a new, even more revolutionary form of fascism. The old guard of the BPP, however, did not intend to sit idly by as their resurgent rivals launch a counterattack, and have rallied around their old leaders once again. The coming decade will see if British fascism stands firm as a bastion of oligarchic traditionalism, cementing its place as the undisputed sovereign once more, or if it is toppled by youthful fire and vigor, its final followers, its first, left to wither away and die forgotten. That's intense. Since the Victorian era, the United Kingdom has always held a spark of innovation. One of the first nations to embrace the Industrial Revolution for what it was, the nation was once a hub of European technological advancement and progress, with inventions such as the reflecting telescope and hydraulic press being first produced on the Isles. However, following the crippling defeat of the Second World War, the British Isles have been reduced to precious little more than a playground for German corporations to run havoc across as they please. From Volkswagen, how do you say that in German? Volkswagen? I don't fucking know. Volkswagen AG to Reichswerk, they dominate the British market and act with impunity as the government cannot regulate them to protect British businesses. The corporations de facto control and own the British economy itself, with the common British laborer at their mercy. Okay, focus, Debile. Oh, there we go. Nothing bad will happen, I assure you. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary gracefully walked into the specified meeting room with the Reich Plenipotentiary and the Commanding General. Man, speaking of the military, wasn't there, like, a Wehrmacht garrison in Cornwall? What the fuck happened to that? Anyways, it started off cordial, not really getting on topic until 10 minutes after Don Weil and Noel Kane entered the room. Noel Kane started, hoping to update the Germans on the rebel situation. Well, thank you, but the Prime Minister and I came here to address both of you on the topic of the increased counts of rebellious activities within Britain. Don Weil cleared his throat. Gentlemen, let us make one thing clear. What is happening now will never, under my leadership, escalate to something seen under the leadership of Chesterton or any former governments. Hang on one sec, gotta check something. Alright, we're good. There will be no widespread rebellion. What the people of Britain are experiencing now is just simply bandits and thugs bringing havoc across the nation. I assure all of you this will not escalate. Both Germans nodded their heads. Wiesenmayer seemed satisfied, granting Don Weil a handshake. Wolf, on the other hand, was hesitant. How do you do, German? You seem no, Geschlechtsverkehr, Häagen-Dazs, You seem exceptionally confident. No, that's French. You seem exceptionally confident, and I would be willing to pledge the support of the garrison to your government. However, in return, we expect the Wehrmacht to be granted command of the garrison's officers. Donville's face fell, but he tried not to let it show. Another area of governments relinquished to Germania was nothing new. Of course, this is not to imply British officer. No, Russian. Of course, this. Of course, this is. No, 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 no. Of course, this is not to imply British officers are incompetent, Wolf continued, a smug flicker in his eye. German officers require German leaders. No, that's French. Achtung. I don't know. German soldiers require German leaders, after all. I trust this is acceptable. Donval sighed internally, knowing he had little choice. You have a deal. The fuck was that? Lord's approval. After our German brothers liberated Britain from demagoguery and finance in the World War, fucking hell, one of their first actions was the repeal of the 1911 Parliament Act, which returned to the House of Lords their ancient right, a veto over any and all legislation passed by the Commons. This means that the Freedom and Security Act will require the approval of the Lords in order to pass. Fortunately, the House of Lords is by far the most reasonable and loyal body of government in the United Kingdom. The old guard is still dominant there, and pragmatists and ideologues alike are pushed to the fringes. As such, it is highly unlikely that they will have any issues with the Act. However, in order to make certain of this, the Prime Minister will meet with his old friend, Lord Portsmouth, a devout supporter of the government and the de facto leader of the old guard in the House of Lords. With his backing, the Act will certainly pass through the Lords. The Brown Seneschal. Like all good National Socialists, Edmund Wiesenmayer felt a cold chill run down his spine the moment he heard that Hitler had been struck. Images of the worst-case scenario appeared in his head, the fatherland burning to ash as it was overrun by liberal Judeo-Bolsheviks, whilst he was trapped here, powerless to help stop it. Thankfully, the Fuhrer had survived, and such an event had not come to pass. Nodding at the two men who had brought him this news, he walked shakily back to his desk. Much was on the mind of the plenipotentiary of the Reich to Britain. He had spent 7 years of his life on this island. 7 long, unforgiving years that he had spent dealing with the whims and tantrums of these stupid people. The mighty German garrison had thrown everything it had alongside their puppets in Downing Street to squash the Jewish rats opposing the Reich, and Wiesenmayer had been there all the way. It was a harsh and unforgiving job. He wished more than anything to be given the order to simply set Wolfenwiggen's To simply set Wolfenwiggen's among anyone even remotely treacherous, so that he could deliver Britain entirely into the Reich's hands. I'm sorry for misspeaking, but it is 7 a.m. I have not gotten a wink of sleep. We're both gonna have to deal with this. He frowned. The Reich itself was starting to buckle. He made it his business to keep up to date with what was happening in the fatherland. The news he received was almost always negative. Students running amok, the Fuhrer's evil advisors jockeying for power, the butchers under Heydrich growing ever stronger. I thought that guy would like that. He sounds like he would. Fucking Nazi. If such things continue to happen, and God forbid the Fuhrer were to die, then the Reich would be plunged into chaos. What would that mean for Britain? Would the Jew prevail in the end? No, it couldn't be so. He shook his head, steeling himself. He would keep Britain very, very close to the Reich. Whether she wanted to be kept in a golden cage or dragged in chains mattered little to Wiesenmayer. He had almost been doing this job for a decade already. May as well finish the job. Britain's Gowler readies her lash. Fuck. Leash, lash, what's the goddamn difference? I know the difference. I know what a lash is. I know what a leash is. But I mean, in the context of this, leash, lash, he said he was going to keep them close to the Reich, so leash. Why is Romania spelled with a U? Working as intended. Of course I'll make sure you have the votes you need. Domvile felt the crushing weight of the world lift off his shoulders for a brief moment as Gerard Wallop, 9th Earl of Portsmouth and the BPP's leader of the House of Lords, spoke, dispelling the cloud of worry and doubt that had plagued the Prime Minister since morning. Good, that's excellent. Thank you, Gerard. This act will be the key to ensuring our safety, I'm sure of it, said Domvile, his old friend nodding in agreement from the other side of the table. I quite agree. These vagabonds need a damn good thrashing from our boys. One final proper kick to put them down for good. Crikey. One final proper kick to put them down for good, replied Wallop, stamping his cane on the ground for emphasis. And a damn good thrashing they shall get, don't you worry. Domvile stretched as he spoke, standing up and making his way over to the drinks cabinet to pour himself a glass of port. Whilst Wallop's news was good, there was still the concerning fact that he even needed to hold this meeting at all. Domvile remembered back in Bedford's day when the Lords would largely obey without question, the great mass of abstentions that always met their bills made redundant by the lack of real opposition. Things had changed since then, and not for the better. The pragmatists were getting bolder. It seemed that every bill saw a cluster of abstentions turn into votes against, leading to meetings like this becoming a necessity. Something the matter, Prime Minister? Wallop asked as Domvile turned to face him. No, nothing was the matter, he thought, shaking his head and tipping back the port with a slightly wobbling hand. All was well. The votes were assured. The problem of the loyalty of the Lords to be handled some other time. Problems of yesterday consigned to tomorrow. The wisest of all choices, you fucking idiot. Jones Jacobins. Because I'm going socialist. Because I'm a socialist. Oh fuck, I forgot to read it. The Queen's PM. What, like on Twitter? A vain man is not something many would describe Harold Macmillan as A vain man is not something many would describe Harold Macmillan as. The nigh Edwardian sensibility of the old man prevented such a thing. Yet, as he sat in his office listening to the words that he had spoken only hours earlier through the radio, he couldn't help but berate himself for such an indulgence. And now, in these hours darker than ever, we can only keep steady and brace ourselves for what may hopefully be the sunlight, shining through the clouds. Thank you, God save the Queen. The fuzzy sound of applause followed. And that was Harold Macmillan, leader of the Conservative Party in exile, speaking at the annual Commonwealth Conference. Supplied a rather nasally commentary. Hang on.
And that was Harold Macmillan, leader of the Conservative Party in exile, speaking at the annual Commonwealth Conference.
Supplied a rather nasally commentator.
This has been the third such speech that Mr. Macmillan has made on the topic of the British government in the last 5 months. Our sources have now...
The presenter was quickly silenced as Macmillan switched off the radio. Did they truly see him as naught but a desperate, aimless old man with nothing better to do than whittle on about the same old injustices ad nauseum? He sighed at the thought. Perhaps they were right. He was king of the exiles, after all. There had been hope at the start. He remembered the righteous, burning anger that every Englishman worth his salt felt at their beloved nation being invaded by the Nazi scum. He remembered the fire in the eyes of every one of his fellow MPs that thought to reclaim their birthright, and to see the collaborator dogs flung in jail for their crimes, and by God what he would give to give that to them. And yet, as the years drew on, that fire dimmed. None of them grew any happier with the situation, but some amongst them simply felt that there was nothing more that could be done to save their country. There had been some hope for change in the 50s, when the fascist idiots inevitably tied themselves into one too many knots, but that was only temporary. When it appeared that the situation had begun to stabilize, the malaise of the exiles got even worse. Sometimes even he began to wonder, was it all worth it? Macmillan shook his head, getting up from his chair and walking over to the cabinet he kept in the corner of the room. He pulled out a large bottle of brandy and poured himself a small glass of it. Jesus fuck, everybody drinks in this mod. By no means did he drink as much as Churchill did. Good, I hope he's dead. He sipped it gently, letting the bitter drink sting his tongue. He had to keep going. Conservatives had to keep going. It would all keep going until the homeland was inevitably won back, where both he and his party would finally be able to redeem themselves. For Queen and country, and no, he won't redeem himself. Not if I have anything to say about it. No capitalist fucks allowed in this country. Oh, fuck, right, I forgot to read it. Bolshevism has always been one of Britain's chief enemies, and while we have historically remained thankfully free of that cancerous ideology, it does not mean that proponents of such a belief do not infest our nation. The left resistance and their leader Jack Jones are the more insidious sides of the resistance. They hide in our factories, whispering their honeyed words into the ears of honest workmen, turning them against us. This rot goes deep, and if we wish to stand any chance of beating the resistance wholesale, then we must rip their agitators and unsanctioned trade unions out by the root. Thankfully, the Gestapo have proven more than eager to aid us in this endeavor. They shall be sent to known hotspots of Bolshevist activity, where they will monitor for activity before razing it to the ground. Yeah, I'm sure that totally won't backfire and drive people to join the resistance. No, not at all. More water. Ugh. Oh, yeah. The modern Caddo. Across all of Britain, on factory floors to old ramshackle houses, the people go quiet, just for an hour, as so many of them listen anxiously on their battered radios. For it is at this time, every Tuesday at 19 o'clock proto, a broadcast goes out. It speaks of the tireless work of Britain standing up to fascism, of working past the failures of old tired men, of a new better Britain emerging from the ashes, one not tied down by its failings, but pushed forward by its people. That broadcast did come from Britain. It was not from an old resistance general, nor an old politician from the war. It was given by an asthmatic former journalist, the man who now stands as the head of the exiled Labour Party, Michael Foot. Michael fucking Foot. As he finishes his broadcast each week, he cannot help but feel a tinge of guilt for hiding away in Canada while the brave resistance members continued to fight. Foot had risen to lead the Labour Party in exile, mainly because very few wanted the role. So many of his exiles had given up after the failures of the 50s and simply given up hope for a free Britain. The long wait had destroyed so many exiles' hopes for a better Britain, hopes of the liberation of the old world. Yet Foot, even in his darkest days when he heard Beaver Brook, his old mentor, had died, never really gave up hope. How could he give up faith when so many Britons continued to fight, to die against the tyranny of the BPP and their Nazi puppet masters? His peers call him a fool, a hopeless romantic for continuing to dream of a free Britain, but he has faith. History has shown that tyranny does not prosper forever. All great dictators eventually fall to the will of a people. Yeah, it's the law of entropy. Everything will fall. When that day comes, when Britain is finally liberated, it will finally be Foot's time to work for the people of Britain, to repay his everlasting debt to all those who have died, and those who continue to fight, to create a new Jerusalem from the ashes of fascism. What? Why Jerusalem? The fuck are you talking about, footy boy? Sorry about that. Forgot to mute. Driving the masses. A stuffy storeroom in a damp, ill-lit warehouse beside one of Manchester's numerous Reichswerk steel factories was hardly a pleasant location for a clandestine meeting, but it was a secure one, and for the senior members of Manchester's underground industrial union, that was worth more, far more, than comfort. "So how's it looking, John? Are all your lads on shift A in?" asked Stephen, the unofficial leader of the unionized drivers responsible for taking the produced steel to the docks before it was shipped off to feed the endless hunger of the Reich's military. "Aye, that they are," replied John, a floor manager for the main factory right opposite the warehouse. He'd been slowly recruiting workers to their cause for years since taking up the mantle from his predecessor, dead in the uprising of '56. The room fell quiet as the man at the head of the table moved to speak. Unlike the others, the union's general secretary had no position in Reichswerk. He was, in fact, currently wanted for high treason, but instead worked solely for the union and the left resistance. Then we are set to proceed when called. I'll tell Jones that Manchester stands ready for the revolution, he said, passing around the report he'd been reading with a smirk. The fascist bastards have lent us a helping hand, it seems, he joked as the paper was passed from hand to hand, drawing a mixture of reactions, but all positive. Our recruitment rate has soared since they called in those Gestapo buggers to try and root us out. Random interrogations and intimidation don't seem to be working too well for the Krauts. Finding its way back to the General Secretary before long, the meeting soon concluded and its attendees vanished back into the night. The following morning, most returned to working and faking contentment under the arrogant gaze of their German overseers. But one thought was on all of their minds, and it was a thought spreading across the minds of every worker chafing under a Nazi yoke. Boot would work better there. Soon, those swine would pay. Alright, now, I think that should be it for part 1. I gotta go eat breakfast, maybe catch a nap. I don't know when I'll pick it up, but when I do pick it up, we'll get back with McLean's Marauders and continue on towards the liberation of Britannia. Now, until next time, comrades.